What's up, house groups? Welcome back. This week was week 9 of the Winning in the Wilderness series, and we were in Daniel chapters 9 and 10. We kind of shifted gears this Sunday from talking about like the crazy apocalyptic visions Daniel had to talking about his response to those visions. How whenever crisis or chaos hit his life, he responded by fasting and praying so that he could seek God. And I'll be honest, part of the reason that I've felt God tugging at my heart to talk about this over the last few weeks is this sense of conviction that my natural response to crisis and chaos is to go it alone. Whenever struggles come into my life, I just want to kind of figure it out by myself and navigate my own solution. And God just kind of smacked me upside the head with that a couple weeks ago. I was up really early in the morning reading through Daniel to just kind of get it in my head so I could ruminate on it throughout the week and figure out what God wanted me to say on Sunday. And I went to the Y right after I read it, and this Lecrae song came onto my workout playlist that I hadn't heard in a long time. It's the song Background, and in it he says, "I had a dream that I was captain of my soul. I was master of my fate, but I lost control and then I sank. So I don't want to take the lead because I'm prone to make mistakes, and all these folks who follow me are going to end up in the wrong place. So just let me shadow you. Just let me trace your lines. Matter of fact, here, take my pen. You create my rhymes. Because if I do this by myself, I'm scared that I'll succeed and no longer trust in you, but only trust in me." And see, that's how you end up headed to destruction, paving a road to nowhere, pour your life out for nothing. And it hit me that morning that so much of my life, even as a leader, is just lived that way. That I want to be able to rely on myself rather than God. And it's a foolish, foolish pursuit. Because the obstacles out in front of me in this life, the giants that are out in front of all of us in this life are too big to conquer on our own. And if we lean into this cultural value that surrounds us of self-reliance, then ultimately we're going to fail and everybody around us is going to suffer. But it's hard not to do because we do live in a culture that is highly self-reliant and highly focused on self-gratification. We want to do it on our own, and we want to go get whatever we want for ourselves. And when we live into that, we blend into that culture. Because I'm convinced that now more than ever, the Church of Jesus Christ needs to stand out from our culture, not blend into it. Like, our world is so broken. There's so much hurting and pain every single place we look. I think our world is desperate for Jesus. But it's never going to see Jesus through his people and through his church until his people get desperate for Jesus, until we're able to come to him and confess our spiritual poverty. Say, "God, we can't, but you can. We're weak, but you're strong. We're empty, and we're desperate for you to fill us." And that's what Daniel did every time he felt overwhelmed. Every time he faced difficulty, he fasted and prayed, because fasting is about coming to God and saying, "I'm empty and weak. I need your strength, and I need you to fill me." It's not like this magic way of getting God's attention. It's about God getting all of our attention. And in the beginning of fasting, like when we give up food for a day or two or a week or two, or 3 like Daniel did, or 40 days like Jesus did, in the beginning we're really focused on what we let go of, on our desperate hunger for food. But by the end of that, the more we allow it to focus our eyes on God, the more every time we think about food, we pray, "God, I'm hungry for you. Like the food that I really need is this spiritual food that only you can provide. The sustenance that I really need comes only from you. I'm coming to you weak and empty. I need you to take the lead so I can play the background." The more we do that, the more, or the less worried we are about what we gave up, and the more beauty we find in what we've found. Like this deeper connection to the Creator that locks our eyes in on his glory and his power, which is what we desperately, desperately need. And so I want to challenge us, because I think our world seems to be losing in every objective measure of human flourishing, and it's desperate for the church to do something. I think we live in a world right now, in a culture right now, that is crying out for revival, but I don't think that will happen if God's people don't commit themselves to fasting and prayer. Fasting so that we know who's in charge and whose power we're really reliant on, and prayer so that he can line our hearts up with his and we can walk out into a hurting world and love it the way that he loves it, because we're seeing people the way that he sees them. Like, no significant religious revival, no significant outpouring of the Spirit of God has ever happened without his people just humbling themselves enough to fast and pray. And there's this moment in Matthew 9 that I talked about on Sunday where the disciples, the 12 disciples, are trying to cast out demons and they can't do it. And they ask Jesus why. And he says, this kind can come out only by prayer and fasting. And I look at the demons that plague our society. The racism and hatred and division and vitriol and disillusionment that are just crushing us right now. On top of the pandemic that's crushing us right now. I look at all of those difficulties and I just believe that this kind cannot come out except by prayer and fasting. But I believe God's ready to pour out his Spirit in a way that rewrites eternity for us and for the people our lives are crashing into every day. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is one that I think gets way too little attention. It's from Ezekiel chapter 47. And Ezekiel has this vision, this dream, kind of like Daniel had dreams. He has this dream of this like little trickle of water flowing out of the temple in Jerusalem. And he walks up and he goes to investigate it, and he starts following the trickle of water that comes from the temple, and eventually it's ankle deep. And he keeps walking further, and then it's knee deep, and then it's waist deep, and then it's above his head. It's too deep to cross, and eventually it turns into this raging river, and he looks down the river, and it's bringing life and redemption to everything the river touches. You guys, I believe that is now. I believe that's our time. We are set up. There's a trickle coming from God's people, from people who want to go deep, who want to connect more deeply to their Creator, who want to surrender to him and say, we can't, but you can, and trust him to bring revival. And I believe if we will do that, if we'll commit ourselves to that and surrender, even though fasting is weird to us, even though it's so countercultural to say, I can't, so I surrender. Even though it's so countercultural to say, God, I want what you want more than what I want. I trust that you know better than I know. Even though that's radically countercultural, I believe if we will do it, the trickle will become a stream that will become a river that will rewrite eternity for the people around us. We can see that in our day. And so my invite on Sunday, my invite to all of you in house groups this week is, will you spend the next 2 weeks praying and fasting with me? This is where I'm going, and I would love it if you'd come with me. If you would commit one day or one lunch hour this week to going without food. And when you feel hungry, say, God, I'm hungry for you. I'm weak, but you're strong. Would you fill me up with a bigger sense of who you are, who you created me to be, and what you want me to be doing in the world, to be a part of what you're doing, to make all things new and set all things right. And then next week, I'm going to go a whole week. It's part of my natural, regular rhythm of the year. And if you want to go a whole week, let's go. And if you did a lunch hour this week and you think you can do a day next week, do 1 day next week. Do 2 days or 3 days next week. But you guys, I believe if we will come to God the way Daniel did, in the face of the crises that are out in front of us, and say, God, this is too big for us to handle. And so we're not going to blend into our culture anymore. We're going to do it your way. Would you fill us up? Then, again, it won't be about us getting God's attention. He's paying attention already, but he will have so much of our attention in that moment that we're able to see the world through his eyes and make the difference he put us here to make. Prayer and fasting. Will you come with me?